Deku? I think he's some pro. By clouds. My head in the clouds, not coming down. Chapter 68. Call out. As soon as Hound Dog opened the door, Tanya dropped into a low bow. I cannot apologize enough for my actions, and I am prepared to make whatever restitutions you and Principal Nezu deem necessary. I am sorry. There was a long moment of silence that made Tanya hesitantly glance up, and he was met with Hound Dog looking at him skeptically.
An apology isn't nearly enough to make up for attempted murder, kid.
Tanya cleared his throat and straightened up, tugging at the bottom of his jacket as Hound Dog turned away from him and walked back into his office. Tanya hesitated in the doorway until Hound Dog sat down at his desk, which he took as an invitation to close the door behind him and sit down on the couch that was pushed against the wall. Hound Dog didn't even look at him for a full minute, which Tanya thought was very impolite. But correcting people had gotten him in more trouble recently than seemed optimal, so he stayed silent. He was supposed to say something, though, right? Tanya was just opening his mouth to apologize again when Hound Dog turned to him with a heavy sigh.
Of all the students that could have gone straight off the deep end and planned murder, I don't know whether to be surprised that it was you or not.
Tanya leaned back slightly in his shock.
What?
Hound Dog sighed again.
I don't know whether or not to be surprised. On the one hand, from all accounts you're a perfect student. Studious, rule-abiding, quick to accept criticism. Basically a teacher's perfect dream. Thank you.
Ida wasn't sure where this was going. Wasn't this mandatory visit with Hound Dog to make sure he knew that going after the hero killer was wrong, and that he wasn't going to do it again? Shouldn't Hound Dog be scolding him instead of praising him?
I wasn't finished, Hound Dog said dryly. Like I said, on one hand, you seem like the perfect student, but on the other, you're rigid.
Tanya sat up, ramrod straight. He knew he could come across that way, of course. His brother had said it enough times to make him familiar with the term, not to mention his classmates.
With all due respect, Hound Dog. Tanya straightened his glasses. I am struggling to understand how that is a bad thing, or even how it relates to the subject of this meeting. And that, Ida, is at least partially why we're here.
Hound Dog shook his head tiredly and grabbed a strand of licorice from a candy bowl on his desk.
Tell me, what happens when you try to bend a piece of licorice?
It bends?
Tanya answered hesitantly. Again, I mean no disrespect, but what does this have to do with... And a candy cane?
Hound Dog didn't let him finish, instead fishing out a candy cane from the same bowl and holding it out in front of him to illustrate whatever point he was trying to make.
If you try to bend that in half, does it bend or break?
Tanya was fairly certain that this was a trick question somehow, like one of Aizawa-sensei's logical ruses, but he wasn't quite sure what the correct response was supposed to be, so the only option left was to answer honestly.
It breaks, sir. Exactly. Hound Dog grinned. Because it's rigid. So, Ida, in this example, you're basically a candy cane.
Tanya was taken aback and sputtered,
Excuse me?
Hound Dog laughed.
Don't worry, it's not supposed to make perfect sense. It's just a silly example that's meant to show how different people deal with stress. Some people, when they encounter something stressful, are able to bend with the stressor and bounce back. More or less, no worse for wear. Kind of like licorice can. But some people, when they encounter a large stressor, say, their brother getting targeted by a serial killer, for example, don't have a flexible enough worldview to be able to bend that stressor. So instead, Hound Dog snapped the candy cane in half, and Tanya gulped. That's a bit of a violent example.
Was he trying to drive home that Tanya had almost died? Because the bandages still on his arms were already doing a good job of that.
Yeah, it is, Hound Dog agreed. But that's the point, isn't it? Tanya, as much as I hate to say it, I'm not really surprised that it was you that went from 0 to 100 like you did. And not just because you have an engine quirk. I wouldn't wish what happened to your brother on anyone. But the fact is that your brother was attacked, and you had a choice. You could have accepted it. You could have been angry. You could have thrown yourself into heroism. But at the end of the day, you haven't developed the flexibility to do any of that. You were too rigid, and so what Stain did, it shattered you. In order to get you to where you need to be to re-enter the hero course, we're going to need to do some work to see why you never developed the emotional flexibility to deal with stresses like this, and help you learn, for a lack of a better way to put it, to bend like a piece of licorice.
Tanya was still a little lost, but that was his problem to deal with.
I'll do my best.
Hound Dog shook his head fondly.
I'm sure you will. You always go things full throttle, which is also something we need to address. Have you heard of black or white thinking? Yes.
Again, Ida wasn't quite sure if this is a trick question or not. Wasn't giving things his all a good thing?
I believe I've heard it in passing before.
Well, black or white thinking is when you see something as all or nothing, Hound Dog explained.
Things are either all good or all bad. There is no in between. It's called a logical fallacy, because when you think like this, your brain is lying to you. The real world works in shades of grey. Do you mean to imply that I have this...
Tanya hesitated.
Logical fallacy? Pretty much. Hound Dog shrugged. Ida, what your little stunt with vigilantism demonstrates is that you see the world in shades of black and white. It's part of why your worldview shattered when you were confronted with a substantial enough stressor. With this thought process, if a student has their feet on the desk, that's bad, disrespectful, and a million other things. But basically, your brain flips that switch and sees it as evil. But if someone's following the rules, then they're good. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Tanya nodded slowly. I suppose it does. But, sir, things are good or bad. Are you telling me that students putting their feet on the desk is a good thing? I'm saying it could go either way. Hound Dog shrugged. That student could be being disrespectful, or they could simply find having their feet on the desk to be more comfortable than sitting normally. They could even have some injury that means they need to elevate their feet. There's no way to know. It's a grey area.
Tanya nodded resolutely.
I see what you mean. But do you really? Hound Dog asked. Or are you just agreeing with me because I'm authority figure, and therefore good?
Tanya opened his mouth to answer, but stopped before the words could even leave his mouth. He owed it to Hound Dog and everyone to at least think about his answer, right? His gut instinct was that he should agree with Hound Dog. He was a teacher and a counselor, so obviously he knew more than Tanya did, but did he really agree that there were some things that existed in shades of grey?
You don't have to answer right now, Hound Dog said kindly,
pulling him from his thoughts.
But I want you to think about it, okay?
Tanya nodded. It was a lot to think about.
What if, he started slowly, what if I can, logically, admit that it makes sense for grey shades to exist naturally, but I'm not sure if they should? For example, I'm not sure I'm comfortable in allowing something to stay grey and having that be fine indefinitely, if that makes sense.
Hound Dog grinned.
Well then, I'd say we're starting to make progress.
So, Kirishima jogged to keep up with Katsuki, who did not slow down to let him catch up.
Kinda crazy to have finals so soon after, moving our entire lives, right? Are you sure you're alright to help me study?
Katsuki scoffed.
As if I'd let you fail with the rest of those extra shitty hair. Hey, they're not gonna fail, Kirishima laughed. You have to be at least a little smart to get into UA, you know. You've got to have both brains and brawn. Yeah, well, how'd you get in? Katsuki smirked. Because obviously it wasn't your intelligence, half a brains.
Kirishima gasped and held a hand dramatically to his chest.
Why, Bakugo? Are you calling me hot? Because it sounds like you think I'm pretty strong and manly. What?
Katsuki sputtered, and shoved Kirishima away.
No way! I'm calling you stupid, dumbass!
Not that he was unattractive, obviously, but that wasn't anything subjective. Anyone with eyes could see that Kirishima was strong, and the way he fought was pretty impressive too. Not that it made him any less of an idiot.
Of course, Kirishima winked. But you're gonna help me with that one, right? On our study date? It's not a date, you idiot.
Chapter 69. Nice. Issues. Alright, so our next course of action should be unlocking the other quirks within One for All. Izuku had a fresh notebook in front of him, and already had a rough schedule outlined for the rest of the semester, now that Mirio's training had to fundamentally change. Wouldn't it be better to take them one at a time? Mirio laughed nervously. I could focus on mastering Black Whip first and then... You're already a third year, Mirio. Izuku leveled him with a deadpan glare.
Let's put it this way. Would you rather manifest these quirks in the middle of a training exercise, or in the middle of a real villain fight where a razor isn't there to help you get them under control?
There was a long moment of silence as Mirio shifted in his seat. Nezu smiled proudly beside him, and Eraser just looked done. Izuku sighed and tapped the page a few times with his pencil.
The only question is how to do it. I never saw a quirk counselor growing up, for obvious reasons, so I'm not really sure what's normally recommended. But there must be some tools that have been developed to deepen your connection to your quirk, right? Meditation would be a good start, Eraser piped up. And practice, obviously. The longer you spend using your quirk, the more you'll become used to using it, and the more you'll discover about it. That's why we place such an intense focus on practical training here at UA. All right, Mirio smiled, a little more confidently now. So I just use my quirk as much as I can, and use meditation to deepen my connection to it? Nezu nodded. That sounds like a good first step, although I would recommend studying the quirks of the past holders as well, so that you can be prepared if and when they manifest. I'll make you a packet, Izuku offered. I've already done most of the research, so it shouldn't be a big deal to compile it into a usable format. I'll try to give you a few suggestions on use as well, if I have time. Great, Mirio grinned. You really are a lifesaver, Deku. I really don't know where else I'd be with One for All if you weren't willing to help me out. Is there anything else I need to know? Not that I can think of, Izuku said slowly. Unless...
All Might's already told you about All for One, right? Mirio cocked his head. Who?
Wonderful, Izuku grumbled. Just peachy. So you're saying that part of the reason I've been having such a difficult time accepting young Midoriya is that I'm projecting onto him? Pretty much. Gran Torino stole another takoyaki from the plate at the center of the table. Don't even try to deny that you can't look at him without thinking about what you were like at that age. I was weak, Toshinori answered honestly. I couldn't have been a hero without Nana's help. Yeah, you're a string bean, weren't you? Gran laughed loudly. And probably everyone told you that you were weak too. So it makes sense you try and see Deku the same way. If you don't prove me wrong, I'm going to be tempted that the reason that you're having such trouble with Deku being a hero is because of your own fragile ego. Toshinori spat up a mouthful of blood. What? I'm the symbol of peace. I don't have a fragile ego. Oh, really? Gran raised an eyebrow skeptically. So, you're not insecure about what it says about you, if Deku succeeds where you failed and becomes the first quirkless hero? Katsuki had finally managed to ditch his group of preppy extras just in time for his therapy appointment. Maybe, eventually, he'd be strong enough that he wouldn't have to go to these stupid appointments anymore. Not that they were nearly as bad as he thought they would be when Nezu and Aizawa had told him that he'd be forced to go to them. If anything, they were even a tiny bit helpful. Maybe even enjoyable. Not that he'd ever tell the mutt that. Or anyone else, for that matter. It was getting more and more awkward to ditch Kirishima and the others. But they'd be the ones to ditch him if they knew he had to go to therapy. Even beyond what he'd done to land there, he didn't want them to think he was weak. Especially Kirishima. Katsuki wasn't quite sure why Kirishima's opinion was so important to him, but Shitty Hair thought strength and manliness were the pinnacle of awesomeness that everyone should be striving for. He didn't deserve anything but the best and strongest friends. Not former bullies that were so weak that they had to go see a therapist every week. But Katsuki was willing to push through it and hide his weakness for now. Because someday he would be the best. And if he was going to be the best, he needed to be the strongest. He rounded the last corner, fully planning on barging into Hound Dog's office like he normally did, but stopped short when he saw someone else just leaving the office, shutting the door quietly behind him. Ida hadn't seemed to notice him, seemingly lost in thought as he chewed on a piece of licorice, but Bakugo couldn't move. He'd never run into anyone else in this hallway before. He should have just turned on his heel and gotten out of there, though, because it didn't take long for Four Eyes to glance in his direction and start striding towards him, chopping his hands. Oh, Bakugo, are you here for a visit with Hound Dog as well? Katsuki almost growled at him to shut up, but Ida didn't even wait for a response as he kept talking, loudly. I must say, today was only my first visit, but it was very enlightening. I hope to be able to end my suspension as soon as possible, so I can rejoin you in the hero course and become the bright heroes of tomorrow that we are all striving to be. Plus ultra. Katsuki scoffed and shoved past him. Whatever, Four Eyes. Just stay out of my way. Bakugo. Ida looked like he was about to scold him, but stopped at the last minute. Maybe his visit had actually done something. Have a good appointment, then. I'll do what I want. Katsuki glared at him and stalked towards Hound Dog's door as Ida finally left. He stopped in front of the door right as Ida disappeared around the corner,
and took a deep breath. Of course, Ida would have to do therapy as part of his suspension, but whatever. He'd keep his mouth shut, right? It wasn't like he cared about Four Eyes' opinion. It's not like he was Kirishima or something. Bakugo huffed and slammed open Hound Dog's door.
What's up, Mutt? Did you miss me? The semester at UA is wrapping up.
Sensei's voice cracked slightly as it came through the TV, which was always a sign that he was upset about something.
The dorms make things a bit more difficult, but you should be able to take advantage of whatever summer training camp they plan to bring the heroes to their knees.
Yes, Sensei, Tomura said quietly.
We'll show those no-good heroes who's in control. How have the recruitment efforts been going? Sensei asked. Has Stain's capture brought you any flesh blood?
Tomura shrugged.
Green's bringing a few recruits by in a few days. He's still vetting them, I think, to make sure they have a high enough XP to join our party. Very well.
There was a long moment of silence, and Tomura almost thought that Sensei had finished the conversation and left. But then there was another crackle of static as the TV started speaking again.
Oh, and one more thing, young Tomura.
Tomura looked at the TV eagerly.
Yes, Sensei. I'll leave the plan for the training camp up to you, but you have a chance to abduct a student known as Deku and bring him here. I'd appreciate if you did so. What?
Tomura jumped up from his seat at the bar and almost disintegrated a part of the wood.
That brat! He almost took my finger. Exactly why it would be best to have him on our side, rather than the heroes,
Sensei pointed out reasonably.
It will be more difficult than I hoped to persuade him to join our path, but I have confidence in you, Tomura. I would not have chosen you otherwise.
Tomura swelled a little with pride, but still scratched at his neck with irritation.
I'd rather just kill the quirkless brat.
Sensei sighed.
If you must. However, a good leader always tries diplomacy first.
Fine, Tomura groaned, and sat back down heavily.
I'll try to recruit him to our party. That's all I can ask, young Tomura, Sensei said proudly. I look forward to seeing what you'll become.